Okay, so the Epilepsy Foundation of Minnesota is a local organization that serves the people of the entire state of Minnesota and the eastern part of North Dakota, and we are an affiliate of the National Epilepsy Foundation. A few housekeeping items before we get started today. We are going to be an hour-long webinar. We do ask, in order to have the best experience possible, that you close out of any additional windows that you might be in. If there are other people in your household who are also on the internet at this time, it's a good idea if they don't do any music or other kind of video streaming at all. It will just make for a better experience for you. We will be offering a certificate of completion, which will be emailed out to you within 3 business days after this webinar. And then we are recording today's webinar. If you will receive with your certificate of completion, you will receive a copy of the PowerPoint, but if you would also like a copy of the recording, we are happy to send that to you. You just contact me, and my contact information will be at the end of the PowerPoint. While the Epilepsy Foundation of Minnesota is hosting today's webinar, all content and discussion points are being led and delivered by our guest speaker, Cindy Tarshish with ADA Minnesota, who I will be introducing more formally in a few minutes. The information we share today is to inform you of aspects of service and emotional support animals. However, any potential benefits to you as an individual of having such an animal should really be discussed with your medical provider. We do encourage you to ask questions as we go today. We are going to hold those questions for the end, but you can ask them as you go. To ask a question, just go to the Q&A icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen and then type your question in and hit send. We also have with us in the background today our program assistant, Mary Mavison, who will be there to help make sure things run smoothly. And she will also be taking care of any kind of technical questions that might come up for you. She'll try to help you through those if that should happen. So I would like at this time to introduce our presenter. Cindy Held Tarshish has been manager of ADA Minnesota since March of 2002. In that capacity, she presents on all titles of the ADA, and she has specific expertise in the area of employment. Cindy has 30 years of work-related experience in the disability community, and she is a certified ADA coordinator and a licensed accessibility specialist. So Cindy, I'm going to turn things over to you, and thank you for being with us here today.
Okay, thanks Deb, I appreciate it. And thanks everybody who's on the Zoom call. I kind of was laughing to myself. I was thinking of that movie, 3 Men and a Baby, and we are 3 ladies in a Zoom. So hopefully we can get this to work. I am super excited to present this topic. As Deb may have indicated, I'm with ADA Minnesota. I'm incredibly passionate about the ADA and also all of the civil rights entitled to individuals with disabilities. So that would include service and emotional support animals. There are lots of myths and questions and concerns about your rights and responsibilities as a person with a disability and service and emotional support animals. So I will start with that. If we could advance the slide, please. Okay, so these in general are the laws, and we need to figure out like who is covered under what law, and it's somewhat simple. So service animals themselves, and we will go into a deep dive on what is a service animal, is covered under the ADA Titles 2 and Title 3, and also different state laws and health code laws. ADA is a federal law, and therefore it is the same in all the states. However, emotional support animals, or you can call them companion animals, but don't call them therapy animals, that's something different. Emotional support animals are covered not under the ADA, however, they are covered under the Federal Fair Housing Act and the Air Carriers Act. So therein lies the confusion. But again, if we can just keep in mind that when we're talking about service animals, we're talking about the ADA, emotional support animals, fair housing, and Air Carriers Act. The Fair Housing Act, also covers service animals as well as the ADA. I think we could do the next slide. Okay, so I had mentioned, I think we got to go back one. I think we skipped over one here. Yep, there we go. So when we talk about the ADA and Title II and Title III, you need to just know, I'm not going to give you my whole hour-and-a-half presentation on, all the titles of the ADA, but what's important to know is that when you're looking at Title II entities, those are the state, local, and federal programs and services and buildings, things that are paid with our tax dollars. So when we're looking at a Title II entity, you're looking at the library, you're looking at City Hall, the Department of Motor Vehicles, all of those things. The ADA states that they should make reasonable modifications to their policies, practices, and procedures when necessary to avoid discrimination. And so that makes it such with altering the nature of the service program activity to allow that particular service animal. Title III of the ADA covers all the public accommodations. That's the grocery stores that you go to, maybe the hotel that you go to, different schools that you may go to. They would be considered under Title III of the ADA. And they talk about also modifying the policies, practices, or procedures to permit the use of service animals by an individual with a disability when necessary to afford the goods and services and privileges of that entity. So basically, it's covered under Title II and Title III of the ADA. Oftentimes, Title II is a little bit more stringent, again, because our tax dollars pay for that. And as you know, people with disabilities also pay taxes. So if that's the case, all the goods and services and benefits should be available to them as well. I think we can do the next slide. I think we've gone through all the legal mumbo jumbo as it is. So let's start our information about what is a service animal. So under the ADA, a service animal is defined as a dog. We'll talk about one little caveat later. I'll keep you hanging on that. But it's defined as a dog that has been individually trained to perform a task or duty for that individual with a disability. So the main difference, really, when I try to explain this to people, the shortcut, a service animal is trained to do a specific task or duty, and they are able to have the ability to recognize and respond. They can recognize a situation and respond to it. Let's say they're a guide dog for somebody who is blind or low vision, and that individual is walking into traffic. Let's say there's some construction and the route has changed somewhat, the truncated dome has been moved, whatever it may be, and that animal has the ability to recognize the situation, respond to it, pull the individual back, right? In many other cases too. So an emotional support animal does not have the ability to recognize and respond. They're merely there to add comfort and support to that individual regarding their mental health concern. Okay, so that is what a service animal is. Like, go to the next slide here. It should be, so it's all in the task. So when we're looking at service animals, and also psychiatric service animals are also considered service animals. This was added for our returning veterans that have post-traumatic stress disorder, and they oftentimes require a psychiatric service dog. So the service animal is individually trained to guide and orient the person, to find the person or place, to search the room or the area for dangerous things. They signal for certain sounds, interrupt and redirect. The balance issue is an interesting one. I had somebody who lived or was doing a vacation, their cabin up north, and the individuals in the cabin association said, no, you can't bring your service animal into the lake, which, first of all, are there not fish and other animals in the lake? I didn't understand it altogether, but for some reason, somebody was upset that they were bringing that dog into the lake, until that individual had to explain that the service, the task that dog provided was balance. That individual was very off balance when the waves would come in the water, and that larger dog would stand next to the individual, and the individual could kind of hang on to or place their hand on the animal's back. So it basically was there for balance assistance. They also can bring help. They can bring medication. The rule of thumb that we always tell people is, if you see a service animal, oftentimes they're wearing a vest or something to identify them, but they don't have to. If you see a service animal out by itself, that is a signal that there is trouble. that service animal is going to find somebody to bring it back to the individual that maybe they've fallen out of their wheelchair, maybe they've had a seizure, whatever it might be. So it's very important to understand if you ever see a service animal by itself, follow that animal. There's some links there to some different organizations that can answer more questions on service animals and psychiatric service dogs. Okay, let's move on. Next slide is, our next slide is, what does do work or perform task mean? You know, like it seems complicated, but not really. It's just the dog must be trained to take a specific action when needed to assist the person, not to provide comfort and snuggle up next to them. It's more an example, like an individual with diabetes may have a dog that's trained to alert them when their blood sugars reach a high or low level. And what's also interesting is oftentimes you'll see a service animal, sometimes like in a almost looks like a baby carrier next to the person's chest. And you're like, oh, that's not a service animal. It is, because that animal needs to be able to smell the breath of the individual to see if it smells a certain way, if it smells sweet or whatever it is. That dog's been trained to react to that, to recognize that odor on that individual and then react to it and get that individual to take the medication or whatever that individual needs to do. A person with depression may have a dog that's trained to remind them to take the medication. Oftentimes people with clinical depression can't even get out of bed to take their medication. And the interesting one for this audience might be a person who has epilepsy may have a dog that's trained to detect the onset of a seizure and then get that person to a safe place or help that person to get down on the ground or wherever that plan is for the safety of that individual. My best example for this is I had talked to a woman very involved in the disability community, and she had a seizure. She had an epilepsy trained dog, and the dog had a magnet inserted into the dog, and the individual with the epilepsy also had a magnet on their end. And when the seizure would begin, the dog was trained to come next to the individual with epilepsy, and when the magnets hit each other from the dog and the individual, the seizure would be interrupted and stopped, right? Seemed fabulous. What happened was the individual had a seizure. There was law enforcement that was called. The law enforcement said this dog is not under the care of the individual because the person was having a seizure, took the dog away to I call it the pound. I don't even know if it's called the pound anymore. So that dog wasn't able to do the task and the individual ended up in an ambulance at the hospital. So that involves a lot of training. It's an unfortunate story. I think that individual who had this happen did try to train the police force on that. So that's kind of a point of interest. I'll take the next slide, if that's okay. Okay, so additional examples of work: assist the individual who's blind or low vision with navigation and other tasks, alert somebody who's deaf or hard of hearing to the presence of people or sounds, provide non-violent protection or rescue work. So they're not there as a pit bull to protect the individual when they're walking the streets, but perhaps provide protection for that individual or to that individual. Some service animals have been trained to help pull the wheelchair, perhaps in inclement weather, assist the individual when they're during a seizure, before and during and after a seizure, alert the individual to the presence of allergens. There's a competitive swimmer, a woman who is just phenomenal, but she has an unbelievable allergy. I think it's to latex, where it's life-threatening, and some of the swimming gear, the caps and some of the goggles and some of the other things have latex in them. That dog sits right on the edge of the pool when she's swimming and alerts her if anybody else in the pool that's competing inadvertently has that latex or whatever she's allergic to, because it's life-threatening, and that dog barks and barks and gets that individual out of the pool into the medication. I saw it, it was unbelievable. They can retrieve things like medicine or the telephone, or if they drop something, can pick it up, provide physical support or assistance with balance and stability, help individuals that have psychiatric or neurological disabilities by preventing or interrupting the impulsive or destructive behaviors. Very important that for people that have OCD type behaviors, but they're not there as a crime deterrent, and they're not there to provide emotional support, well-being, comfort, or companionship. That is not the role of a service animal. Okay, let's move it on to my next slide. Oh, I love this. This is my favorite. You always have a little humor during the day. A service animal is not a pet. So if anybody is blind or low vision on this, We have a picture of the United States Post Office, and this individual has a big bear with a service animal vest, service animal pet, and the post office gentleman is saying, no, 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 you can't come in here. And the lady is saying, but he calms my anxiety, so it's a bear. So I put that in there just to bring up the fact that, you cannot present your pet as a service animal. Minnesota was the 22nd state last August to sign on to the fake service animal law, where it is now a misdemeanor in Minnesota and again 20 other states to try to fake your way and say that your pet is a service animal. I think the fine it's minimal, like $250 or something, but at least it's on the books. There's a law against it, so that's good. Okay, next slide. Our emotional support, therapy, comfort, or companion animals considered service animals. I think I belabored this a bit. No, these terms are used to describe animals that provide comfort just by being with the person, but they don't perform a task or duty. I like to say they may be just as helpful for the individual with a disability. They are, but they are not considered a service animal. Therefore, they are not allowed in public accommodations. They can't go to the grocery store with you. They can't go to Target with you, the movie theater, whatever that may be. Okay, next slide, please. Does the ADA require service animals to be professionally trained? That's an interesting question. No, there's no law that says that the service animal has to be professionally trained. That was not the case. Many service animals are, but a lot of people want to get a dog and then professionally train that animal. And there's no centralized list of certified animals in the United States. People will say, well, I'm certified disabled and my dog is registered. That may be some hoax or whatnot on the internet. For $65, you can get a certificate or whatever that may be. And for another $100, you can order the vest. But there's no online certification process. There's no professionally trained program that's required. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, here's a good one. Are service animals in training considered service animals under the ADA? They're not. Under the ADA, the dog must be already trained to perform the task or duty, and also have the training not to relieve itself inside, whatever those things. But the exception is in Minnesota and some other states, service animals in training can be taken into public places so that they can learn how to behave and act and provide their service in a public place of accommodation. But they still have to be under the control of a handler, and a puppy who's not even trained would not be considered a service animal in training. They still have to have the basic training and skills. And we also suggest individuals that if you are going to take your service animal in training to a place, call ahead and let them know that you're going to do that. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is a good one. What questions can a covered entity's employees ask to determine if the dog's a service animal? So we get a lot of calls, from the stores saying, well, I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to be discriminatory, but how do I decide if this is indeed a service animal? I get the Hot Rod Association calls every year. They don't want any animals scratching up the hot rods and, concerned about what questions they can and cannot ask. So in a situation where it's not obvious that the dog's a service animal, okay, that, sometimes it's obvious that you see that somebody is blind, low vision, they have a white cane, they've got the dog with the service vest, and sometimes it's not obvious, like a dog for a seizure or diabetes, whatever. The employees of that entity can say, is the dog a service animal required because of a disability, right? Is this because of a disability? And what work or task has the dog been trained to perform? Those are the two questions, right? They can't request the documentation, show me your certification, show me the training, tell me what your disability is. They can't ask. There's only those two questions. So when you get the PowerPoint, this is a very important slide to keep on hand. Okay, next one. Okay, so there's protocols, inquiries, do's and don'ts. What questions can I ask? People are always nervous about this. Again, we go back to, is the animal required because of a disability? What work or task has the animal been trained to do? But this is not in the DOJ rules, but we say to businesses, and then you can say, how may I help or assist you? Don't grab the dog and bring it in, don't pet the dog. I mean, we'll get into that, but you can ask. It's okay to ask, just don't assume the individual needs help, right? What are some questions that are off limits? You know, if the animal is required because of a disability, or what work or task has the animal been trained to do, if it's readily apparent or obvious. If you can see that this is clearly a service animal, you don't need to ask these two questions. You cannot ask what's the nature or the extent of your disability, what meds are you taking, show me the animal certification, show me, give me an example, provide it, example, demonstrate, you know, how the dog helps you. No, the individual does not need to do that. And I get this one a lot. Will you have your dog wear a service animal badge? You know, so now they're going to brand you as a person with a disability that you have a service animal, because they're nervous that everybody else, now it's always the everybody else clause, will want to bring their animal here. So here, you know, you're staying in our hotel, will you please have your animal wear this I am a service animal, you know, pin on their leash? No, they can't ask you to do that. Okay, next slide. Okay, so here's, I mentioned that we're going to go over animal etiquette and common sense. So it's important. Let's make sure we're on the right slide here. Was that the next slide? The etiquette? Did we miss one or? Nope. Okay. Yeah, okay, perfect. Okay, so pay attention to the handler or the trainer. Don't pet it. Don't distract it. The issue with distracting the animal, and sometimes, you know, you've got a small child, oh, let's go see this dog. That the second that dog is distracted, it can't do its job. Its job is to protect that individual, maybe to keep them out of traffic, maybe to, you know, see if they're going to have a seizure or they're having a mental health episode. So don't distract the animal. Don't feed the animal. Treat the handler with respect and dignity. Talk to the handler first if you want to. Don't stare or take pictures. Don't bring your dog up to the other dog. You don't know that they're going to get along. It's distracting. And if all of this happens and you're a handler of a service animal, use the opportunity to educate others. And then there's a link there that might be of help for the service dog etiquette. Okay. I forgot to mention that I'm in the Guinness World Book of Records as the fastest talker. So I'm hoping that you're listening fast. If not, you can request a recording or you'll get the PowerPoint. But I just want to get through this so that we can answer your questions. Okay, so do service animals have to wear a vest or patch or special harness identifying them as service animals? No, I think we kind of went through there. They do not need, the ADA does not require them to wear anything identifying them as a service animal, a special harness or whatnot. A lot of users prefer that because then it's hands off and this dog is working. And then when the dog is home, they take it off and the dog is not working. But again, an entity cannot ask that you wear something special to identify this. Now, these things are on sale online, which they do you no good if your dog is not really performing a task or duty for you, but unfortunately you can buy some fake ones online. Okay, next slide, please. Who's responsible for the care and supervision of a service animal? This is a great question. So the handler is responsible for the caring and supervising of the service animal, which includes toileting, feeding, grooming, the vet care, all of these things. In fact, the airports now, especially in Minneapolis, they had to create a green space where the animal could relieve itself. Let's say you are on a layover here, you know, you're not on a direct flight and you get off and you need to relieve your animal. Well, you used to have to go back out through security outside and then wait for security again, you know, so that seemed ridiculous. So now they've made it so that you have to have a green space inside the secure area where the animal can relieve itself. Now I have a situation where somebody is in a long-term care facility and they have a service animal and they're allowed to have a service animal, but they have to provide the care, right, for that service animal. But now because the long-term care facility doesn't want that service animal, they are not being punctual and helping that individual get into their wheelchair so they can take the service animal out. So I'm working on that. That's kind of disheartening for me right now. We also have questions about if a college student's living in the dorms and has a service animal, and then all of a sudden they test positive for COVID, and then they're put in isolation, and then they're in isolation with their service animal, who then does the care for that animal if that individual can't come out? So my phone does not stop ringing. I can't make this stuff up, people. So these are the things I'm working on. This was a treat to do this today. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, can I charge a pet service fee or damage deposit for a service animal? No, you cannot. A service animal is not a pet. and the owner cannot be charged for surcharge or deposit. However, if the animal damages the property, they are responsible for paying for it and repairing it. We find this a lot in like hotels. They want to charge more for a pet friend, for a service animal room. If they charge more for a pet friendly room, they can't charge you more because this is not a pet. That makes sense? Okay. All righty, let's move on. Next slide. Okay, can a person bring a service animal with them to go through the salad bar or other self-food service lines? This is interesting in light of COVID because, I mean, I've not been into a restaurant at all myself, or I don't live in a dorm, but I don't think that there are salad bars or self-serve food things out there right now in light of COVID. I'm gonna hope not, but let's say it's not COVID and it was all a dream. Yeah, service animals must be allowed to accompany the handler through the self-service food line. They can't be prohibited from communal food areas, like when you live, like I get a lot of calls about like shelters, homeless shelters and dormitories. But the dog also can't touch the food. I mean, the dog has to be down below and can't be up there touching the food. I've seen instances, in fact, I provided a conference. I turned around and that service animal was up on the buffet table eating the desserts. I almost had a heart attack. So that's not okay. DOJ, there was a bar, BJ's Bar, about 2 or 3 hours from here, lost a case with DOJ because they didn't allow an individual in the bar to go through the buffet, and they lost that case, and I had to come in and train them as part of the settlement. So that is that. Next slide, please. Okay. Are restaurants and bars and other places that serve food or drink required to allow the animal to be seated on the chair or the animal to be fed at the table? No, siree, Bob. Seating, food, and drinks are provided for the customer use only, not for the animal. Generally speaking, a trained service animal doesn't even often eat out. They usually eat in the morning and when they're at home, and then they eat when they get home. If they need to eat or drink during the day, they have a special bowl, maybe at the person's place of work, but that dog is never allowed to sit next to the person on the bench or eat off the table, right? And the entities are not required to allow that to happen. I always say that is a huge red flag of that individual is not a service animal. If there's a dog sitting there and they say it's a service animal and it's eaten off the table, not a service animal. Okay, next slide, please. When can service animals be excluded? They can if the animal's out of control and the handler has not taken effective action to control it. Because again, the animal has to be under the control of the handler or the owner at all times, and also if it is not housebroken. They cannot do that. However, when you exclude that animal and ask it to leave, you still, as a business owner, need to offer to provide that good or service to that individual in an alternative method. I'm sorry you have to leave. Your service animal's not under your control. Would you like us to pack up your food for you? Would you like us to deliver it to your room? Would you like curbside delivery? Would you like us to deliver it to you? Something like that. Okay, next slide. What does under control mean? Do service animals have to be on a leash? And do they have to be quiet and not bark? So the ADA requires that they have to, again, be under the control. However, they can't do the requirement that the dog has to be on a leash because certain individuals with certain disabilities are unable, because of the disability, to hold on to the leash, right? So the leash, sometimes it'll be connected maybe to a wheelchair or what, but because of the disability, they can't control it. With a leash, that's fine, as long as the dog is under control with commands, does not have to be on a leash. And barking exceptions, nobody likes a barking dog unless the dog is trained to bark to alert the individual of danger. Let's say somebody is deaf, hard of hearing or whatever, and it's barking on command to let them know somebody's at the door, danger's at the door, there's a fire, the alarms are going off, whatever that may be. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. What can be done when a service dog is being disruptive? Again, I think I mentioned that if out of control, they can be asked to leave and remove from the premises, and then provide the good or service in a different method. Okay, trying to get through these so we can get to questions. Okay, so a city council requires, a city or county requires the dog to be vaccinated. Does this apply to service animals? It does. It does apply to service animals. Individuals who have service animals, they're not exempt from any local animal control or public health laws. Okay, next slide. Oh, so here's my favorite, our little bit about miniature horses. I knew we would get to that. Okay, so so why miniature horses? So miniature horses can also be considered a service animal. They also must be individually trained to do the work or task. And miniature horses, and we're not talking a pony, not a little horse, not a little pony. It's actually considered a miniature horse. They're about the size of a large dog. They do have the ability to recognize and respond. So why would somebody want to have a miniature horse? They were originally introduced for individuals who needed a service animal but were allergic to dogs and dog hair. So they found another species, a miniature horse, that if you're allergic, your accommodation is, your modification of the policy is that you'd be allowed a miniature horse because you'd be too allergic to the other agreed upon animal, which was a dog. Okay, so that's my miniature horse speech. I'll get off my high horse now and get to the next question. Emotional support animals. So now we're moving on. We're about halfway through our presentation here. I think we're good. Emotional support animals. So they can be called emotional support animals, companion animals. They are not called therapy animals. A therapy animal is more of an animal that's trained to go into places like long-term care facilities, vets' homes, things like that, to provide therapy, emotional therapy, but they're not an emotional support or companion animal. These are typically a dog or a cat, although they can be other species. Had a little issue with the peacock on the plane. That didn't go well. I think we had a little squirrel incident. I mean, you always hear about those, but they provide therapeutic benefit to the owner through companionship, right? They provide emotional support and comfort to those with psychiatric disabilities or mental impairments, for people that maybe are agoraphobic or they have such anxiety that it calms them down. So that would be what an emotional support animal is. They don't recognize and respond. They're not providing a task or duty. They are merely there as emotional support to that individual with a psychiatric or mental health impairment. Okay, let's move on. Places of public accommodation. As I mentioned before, the animal is not specifically trained to perform a task for the individual, so therefore they are not allowed in places of public accommodation, right? Unlike a service animal, emotional support animal is not granted access to a hotel, a grocery store, a movie theater, a restaurant, all those things. So you can have an emotional support animal and you can have it in your townhouse or your apartment or your dorm. You can get on a plane with it. You just can't bring it into places of public accommodation because it's not a service animal. Okay, next. Okay, so let's see here. So no pets allowed here. Under the Fair Housing Act, an emotional support animal is viewed as a reasonable accommodation in a housing unit that has a no pet rule for its residents. So what this means is, let's say the building has no pet rule. Because of your disability, you are asking for a reasonable accommodation under the Fair Housing Act, not the ADA, under the Fair Housing Act, to let you have that emotional support animal where you live. And this now includes student housing and dorms. So that's a really good thing. So again, the Fair Housing Act allows it as a reasonable accommodation to have that animal in as an emotional support animal. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's see here. So what can a HUD housing provider ask? Does the person seeking to use and live with the animal have a disability, the physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities? So let's say, you know, either it's Section 8 or private housing or condo, anything is covered under HUD, right? So that's one thing that they can ask, right? They can also ask, does the person making the request have a disability related need, right? For an assisted animal. Did we skip a slide or two? I think we might have. No, never mind. I'm sorry. It's my own fault. I just wanted to make sure I got in about the dorms. Okay, so the HUD housing provider can ask, does the person that needs the animal have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities? That's really ADA language. And number two, does the person making the request have a disability related need for the assistance animal? In other words, does the animal work, provide assistance, perform tasks or services for the benefit of the person with a disability, right? So that's the service animal, or provide emotional support that alleviates one or more of the identified symptoms or effects of a person's existing disability. So the Fair Housing Act is going to cover both the service animal and or the emotional support animal, right? So it covers both. ADA only covers service animals. Fair Housing Act covers service animals and emotional support animals. So they can ask, does the person have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity, or do they have a disability related need for an assistance animal? Let's move on. What does the tenant need to provide? So while the tenant or the owner does not need to disclose the disability, he or she needs to provide documentation from a doctor or another health professional. So who could this health professional be? It is the person who is treating them for that disability that they then would need an emotional support animal. So it could be the physician, psychiatrist, social worker, or other mental health provider that's providing emotional support for them. Is it going to be their physical therapist for their knee surgery? No, because that would be more of a service animal. But for emotional support animal, it's going to be the person who's treating that emotional or mental health situation. Okay, we move on. Okay, I put this in here because I know you're going to be getting the PowerPoint. It's a sample letter from a service provider, because oftentimes you go to your service provider and they're like, I don't know what you need, you know. So here is a template that I found that you could then give to your service provider, your doctor, that talks about fair housing and the ADA and also the Rehab Act. It's all in there. They just need to fill in the blanks. So hopefully you'll find that helpful. People have been successful using this. Okay, can a person have more than one service or emotional support animals? So that's a tough one. So we've not found a case where somebody has needed like a support animal for their support animal. I've heard about it, but when there does not seem to be cases dealing with the issue of multiple emotional support animals, the basic requirement is that if the person were claiming they need more than one emotional support animal, they would need medical documentation supporting that, right? The practitioner would need to provide documentation that each support animal alleviates some symptom of the disability. So maybe they need an emotional support animal for this, an emotional support animal for that. You know, it's not that you had a cat as an emotional support animal and that cat had 6 kittens and now you need all those kittens to provide emotional support for you. That's probably not going to fly. I'm working on a situation right now where somebody was denied in housing. They have both a service animal, a dog, and an emotional support animal, a cat, and we're told by the landlord that no, they don't allow any service or emotional support animals at all, which is illegal to say. But yes, you could ask for more than one service or emotional support animal, but you'd have to have your doctor document why. Okay, next. How can I file a complaint? That's very easy. HUD offers this online system on how you do that. And it's right there, the portal. I think it was live originally, that link, but you'll have to let me know how that works out. But that's how you file a complaint with HUD. Okay. What's the next slide? Air Carriers Act. There's a lot of language there, but this is for individuals who can we go back one slide? I just want to say one thing about about HUD. So what I wanted to say is we have a regional office here. It's located in Chicago. Our HUD office, our HUD office is in Minneapolis. We have a regional office. The woman who does our Fair Housing Act is in Chicago. So if you call our HUD office and you're not getting anywhere and you have a problem with Fair Housing Act and emotional support animals or service animals, ask them to give you the contact information for the woman who specifically does fair housing. If that doesn't work, let me know, but it is a number that's based in Chicago. So don't think it's the wrong number. That's our regional office. Okay, sorry. Moving on. No, we already did that. Okay, Air Carriers Access Act. Okay, why I put this on here, it's a great thing that individuals with disabilities can now fly with emotional support animals or service animals. A, they don't have to pay the $300. B, they have that animal with them to provide, if it's a service animal, to provide the task or duty, or if it's an emotional support animal, to help that individual while flying, right? The problem with it is that so many people have taken advantage of this and have found out that if they just get a letter from their doctor saying they need an emotional support animal, A, they don't have to pay the $300, and B, they can fly with their animal. So it's been difficult to determine if people, who is abusing this and how this is working. You can kind of tell if an animal's out of the control of the owner. But they do need medical documentation. In some places, they have to provide 48 hours in advance a notice and check in an hour before. There are also physicians online, services online, where the individual does an online survey. They list 2 or 3 psychiatric conditions, and then they get certification, doctor's note that they need an emotional support animal. So where it's good that, very good that we have the Air Carriers Access Act, because there's been such abuse of it, I'm seeing it tighten and tighten. But these are the rules on how you can then bring your service and or emotional support animal on a plane. Okay, moving on. Okay, so if there are complaints under the Air Carriers Access Act, this is the where you would actually go to on the internet to file a complaint. Okay, resources. I'm always about resources. We have the Great Lakes ADA Center, and they are located at the University of Illinois at Chicago. They have 6 states in the region, and ADA Minnesota is one of them. So you could call me first or call them. They also have on their website, which is wonderful, a lot of webinars and teleconferences, and it's all archived there. So I'm sure they've done some wonderful trainings on service and emotional support animals as well. Department of Justice, if you wanted to file a complaint, you could certainly do that at Department of Justice, or if you want additional information, documentation that you want to give to your landlord or a business or whatnot, you'd go to ada.gov. I've given the number to our HUD office right there. Next page, please. Technical assistance materials. Here's the revised ADA requirements on service animals from Department of Justice. These are the new 2010 regs. It's a really good document. If you're having issues with a landlord or a business, I would print that off and give that to them. How to comply with Americans with Disabilities Act, a guide for restaurants and other food service employers. That's very helpful if you've been denied access to a restaurant with your service animal. Okay, next slide. Questions. Okay, so here's me. We're gonna have about, we're gonna have plenty of time. It was about 45 minutes that we were presenting. And here's me. I am at ADA Minnesota. ADA Minnesota is a program within the Metropolitan Center for Independent Living. You can reach me a variety of ways there. I'm always around. You can email me, call me. My one caveat is, if you didn't like me, I am the only one that answers the phone. I'm the only one at ADA Minnesota, so you are going to get me. But in all seriousness, I'm always happy to help. And if I can't answer your question, I do have a great deal of other resources and other colleagues and professionals that can ask that I can ask to help you. So with that, and I'm sorry that I went through that so fast, but again, I believe you're going to be getting the PowerPoint. I would be open to questions.
So Cindy, I have a few here for you.
Wonderful.
Is an emotional support animal only for mental illness? What about things like cancer, where an animal can help handle the stress of going through chemo?
That's a good question. So but the impairment is really the stress, it's not the cancer. So yes, an emotional support animal, you have to look at what is that dog being used for. Is it a task or duty? If you're doing your chemo, are you not able to physically bend down, pick something up, or is it the stress, the anxiety, and all of those things that come with the chemo of cancer? And yeah, an emotional support animal is indeed there to provide relief from that stress, that anxiety, and all those emotions that come from going through the chemo, but it's not really there to help with the chemo. It's really there to help with the stress and the anxiety of that.
Great. Thank you. You may have already touched on this, but does every landlord have to allow emotional support animals, or is it only for subsidized housing?
Good question. Any landlord. It's not just subsidized. It can be market rate apartments. I get a lot of calls, many calls from condo associations with those lovely homeowner association things where, you've bought a townhouse there, or you're renting from somebody else, and they don't allow a service animal or any animals because that's their policy. And then they have to request a modification to the policy. But it's any, apartment, condo, or housing. It's dorms. It's homeless shelters. It's all of these things that are covered. Dorms. I just came across, I can't think of it. I'll have to think about an interesting story that's occurring right now that's happening. Turn that off. I told everybody to turn their phones off and leave my house, and my phone went off. Oh, anyway, they do. What's the next question?
And I do want to just remind everybody, we do still have some time here. So if you still have questions, go ahead and keep typing them into that Q&A box.
Or if something wasn't clear, I know, we really wanted to get through the basics here. And I always like to give examples of what has happened with other individuals. I'm curious, has anybody tried, because that was the first I had heard of it, about the magnet piece, where the dog and the individual with epilepsy would come together?
Yeah.
People have had success with it, and or has anybody not had success because the dog was removed? Because, is the dog under your control when you're having a seizure? No, but that dog is the task or duty is that dog needs to get to you. So it is performing its task or duty. I went round and round on that. Has anybody here had that happen, or know of any instances?
I haven't heard of any particular instances of problems with it. I have heard of an individual who does have a dog who has the magnet in its collar. And then what she actually has is something called a VNS, which is a device that they implant in the chest, and it has wires that connect and they send signals to the brain. And that device is activated by that magnet in the dog's collar. And so when the dog detects the seizure, it will lean up against the person's chest to activate that. It is a really, really neat thing that's able to be done. So, but no, I don't know. I'm not seeing any answers to your question about whether anybody has had experience with that. Here is another one for you, though. I have a question about HUD's definition of a disability. How do they define a disability, or are they depending only on the doctor writing a support letter?
Would this be for a service animal or emotional support animal?
She did not say that.
Okay.
Maybe she'll clarify that here.
I'm assuming that HUD has the same definition that the ADA, that if you are, and I think it did say, if you're significantly impaired in one or more major life activities, walking, seeing, breathing, hearing, speaking, communicating, concentrating, and then there's the other, the new one of bodily function, something that occurs inside your body. So I think that HUD uses, they don't have a list of disabilities. It's more if you're significantly or substantially impaired in one or more major life activities, then you would be considered a person with a disability. But there's no list of disabilities. But however, it is unacceptable if somebody's disability is obvious and it's obvious that it's a service animal to ask those two questions. But again, if it's not apparent, then they can. So it's kind of different for emotional support animals.
Which she did just clarify that she was talking about emotional support animals.
Emotional support animals, yeah. So yeah, again, there's no list. However, for an emotional support animal, generally speaking, those provide comfort support for individuals that have a mental health or psychiatric condition rather than a physical disability. So if that dog is providing comfort and support for an individual that has a documented I guess, emotional health, mental health, psychiatric disability, then they could ask for the accommodation of having that emotional support animal with them, either in housing or on an airplane.
So then back to her question about how they define that disability, or whether they're depending only on the doctor writing a support letter for the emotional support animal.
Right. You do have to have medical documentation. I mean, they can ask for medical documentation. Now, that being said, they don't have to say what the actual diagnosis is. This person's bipolar, this person's schizophrenic, none of that, because sometimes there's stigma attached to that. We know that. We accept that. We don't like to accept that, but all they have to say is this individual has a disability that the impairment requires them to have the services of an emotional support animal. And I can help that person offline too, to help them and their doctor to do that. But I think if we looked back at the slides, it would say that basically it's talking about the impairment that's caused, if they substantially limit one of our major life activities or have a mental health issue. They don't have to say what the actual disease or diagnosis is. They just have to say what the impairment from my mental health condition causes me to be anxious, and therefore I need an emotional support animal. So you don't have to say what it is, just that you have one. That's
great.
The landlord can't say, well, what's wrong with you? What do you have? I need to know. No, they just need to know what the doctor says, that the doctor is prescribing for you an emotional support animal, and you are asking for a reasonable accommodation to their no pet policy, that that you are allowed to have your emotional support animal in there. Oh, is there another question? Because I have another example.
Yes, there is.
Okay, go ahead.
Question, but okay.
Go for it.
We have a dog that we got for my son that is 6. He has epilepsy. So far, without training, the dog has picked up on 8 seizures of his. We've had the dog trained in general manners and getting his medication and bring it back. We plan on sending the dog to school. Do we just need a letter from the doctor for the dog to go to school then, since there doesn't need to be any license?
Oh, it's always so hard with the schools. I would get such kickback. I just like to scream sometime. I hope it goes well. It should go well. It's all a matter of, you said the dog is 6 or the child is 6?
The child.
The child's 6. So here's the issue. The handler, the child, needs to be the one who takes care of the animal. Is the 6-year-old able to, if given time during the school day, to have the ability to feed the animal if need be, take the dog out to be toileted, and have that animal under their control at all times? If yes, but you can't ask and sometimes it will happen, but you can't really ask other people in the school to help maintain the care of the dog during the day. So, but this is a service animal. You've trained this animal, it doesn't need any certification, right? I would just alert the school, that you it's because it's Title II. Is it a private school or a public school?
She did not say. Maybe she'll.
Yeah. Because the public school, they're Title II. They're getting government, state, local, federal dollars for that school. So, and they can't say, we can't have the service animal here because we have children of different culture and they're afraid of dogs, or we have a student who's allergic to dogs. If that's the case, then you have to make sure those kids are in different classrooms or sit in different places, just like kids who have nut allergies. They sit at maybe a different table or different section where, where the other children don't have peanut butter next to them or whatnot. So, but they can't say, oh, other kids are afraid or the teacher's afraid, or if that dog is truly trained to detect a seizure, so that's the recognize and respond to it, get that child to a safe place when they're having a seizure, or get that child's medication. I have an instance of a young girl who's going to be going to college in northern Minnesota, and she wants the accommodation that if she has a seizure, that the professor, and it only happens very rarely, but the professor would take the pre-measure oral diazepam and squirt it in the individual's cheek to stop the seizure. Now, does it seem reasonable? Is that the professor's responsibility? The Office for Students with Disabilities said no. But again, you know, it's the same thing as an EpiPen. If somebody's having an allergic reaction to a net and it's pre-measured. So there's lots of different caveats to all of this. I don't think it is the professor's responsibility. I don't know necessarily that it's the parent's responsibility to help with the animal, but if that animal's trained and under the care that responsible 6-year-old young man and it's helping them, then that service animal should be allowed in the school. That being said, I do fear that you might get pushback from the school. And if that's the case, you should certainly call me, or you can call the Department of Education. If you could write this number down, the Department of Education Office of Civil Rights, and that number is 312-730-1560. I also wanted to give that HUD number of the Fair Housing Act woman in Chicago. That direct number, 312-913-8439.
And can I just follow up that first number you gave? You
Yes.
said was the Department of Education?
Office of Civil Rights. Mhm.
Civil Rights, okay.
Yep. Again, that dog, it's trained. It's providing a task, right? Recognizing and responding to the situation. You may want to, get a service vest for that animal just so that other students aren't coming and petting it. You may also, as a parent, want to come in or have somebody from epilepsy or someplace from, other organizations come in and train the kids in the class, after COVID when you're allowed to go in, but go in and train the administration or the nurse's office or that classroom or that teacher.
And I will just put a plug in that we are doing trainings remotely at this time during COVID. So we can still do trainings even though school's not actually in session. Cindy, she did follow up too to say that it is a public school.
Okay.
And then she had a follow-up question. So would we call his dog a service dog when we have his letter written from his doctor?
So yes and no. So generally speaking, you'll need medical documentation if it is an emotional support animal. So we don't want them to think it's emotional support animal. I would make sure that the doctor, when he writes this note, that it's necessary for the student, you could put it in, I don't know if your student has a 504 plan at all, but this could maybe be put in a 504 plan that you're allowed to, bring your supports, your service animal to school. But if your doctor's going to write a note, which can't hurt, I would have them say that this is a trained service animal. Okay.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Me as well too, if you need backup.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
So that does appear to be the end of the questions for right now.
That hour went fast, people. That went fast.
That did go very fast, and I thank everyone for the wonderful questions that they submitted. If you do have additional questions, you can certainly contact me or Cindy afterward. Cindy is going to be the more knowledgeable person when it comes to this information. If you have questions about specific things related to epilepsy, I would be the one to talk to.
Right.
So
I always like to learn something too. So, if something didn't make sense or to you, please reach out to me. I'm still working from home, but we're all still working. So happy to help in any way.
Great. And I just want to take a few minutes here at the end before we close out to remind everyone who's here today about our information services program at the Epilepsy Foundation of Minnesota. We do offer free one-on-one support for individuals and other people impacted by epilepsy. We have customized tools and resources. You can call and ask questions on a variety of epilepsy-related topics. And we do have a resource library on our website where you can download written materials. You can also get those written materials directly from me. This is how you contact me. Again, my name is Debbie Leone. It's dleone@efmn.org. And this is my direct phone number here, 651-287-2303. In addition to webinars like this, we also offer services like we're doing, I think I mentioned earlier that we're doing things virtually now. So we have virtual trainings, we have virtual connect groups and virtual social events. So if you would like to help the Epilepsy Foundation continue to be able to serve the epilepsy community, donations are always appreciated, and you can get information about how to do that at the Make a Difference link on our website. And this is our website, www.efmn.org. Here's just some, for those of you who are particularly interested in seizure assist dogs, there's a wonderful article on our national website, our national organization's website about seizure first aid dogs, just an introduction to them. And we also have a document that has a list of seizure dog organizations that provide seizure dogs to people with epilepsy and possible funding sources. And I will be emailing out that document along with your certificate of completion and this webinar. It's PowerPoint. So with that, I just want to thank Cindy Tarshish once again for, Cindy, thank you for sharing your expertise with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And I want to thank everyone who attended. And with that, that concludes the webinar. And I hope you all have a wonderful day.